everyone. Hey, thanks for joining us, either right now or later, if you choose to watch us later. I apologize up front for any coughing that I do. I'm still struggling with this cough that I'm pretty sure I developed here with the onslaught of spring and blooming things and things that are now coming and springing to life that are springing to life allergies. That's at least what I'm told by my doctor. And I actually forgot to take my bring mommy up over in Studio 2 over there. She's the resident expert on all things that make people better in their body, mind, and soul, and things like that. Because for years, her and actually Randy too, our daughter, have been like really good experts on things that are natural remedies and home remedies and things that make your body and immune system better. So, yes, Miranda, what would you suggest for my cough?
Just to clarify, I would be the resident expert in this house.
Yes.
Not necessarily an expert in general. For your cough, well, whatever the doctor told you, dear.
Whatever the doctor told me.
As well as, the Manuka honey works really well usually.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I forgot to take the Manuka honey.
And avoiding the pollens as well is also helpful. But Brett won't take me up on my suggestion to wear a mask while he's outdoors, which is, I'll have to admit, I feel a little silly wearing a mask just to go for a walk. But I do sometimes just to avoid the effects of the pollens.
Yeah. Well, yes, and it is kind of frustrating. Masks actually, like if I'm wearing them, we do wear masks and stuff. It's just when I do it, it seems to make me want to cough more too. And I don't know, it's annoying. So I apologize up front for my coughing today. But hopefully we'll get it cleared up. If you have ideas and recommendations, things work for allergies and coughs and things like that, let us know in the comments. I'm willing to try almost anything, all kinds of stuff. So anyway, hi Miranda, how are you?
Good.
This is the impromptu part of our broadcast, the unplanned. What are you doing?
What am I doing? I'm sitting here, just,
Sitting,
sitting,
cool.
And listening to you.
Listening to me rattle on about nothing.
I suppose everybody's doing that right this minute.
So the upfront part here is just give people a chance to find us before we dive into all our content and stuff. We just kick things around a little bit just to create some time so people can find us. So let's move on. We're going to get into...
Since clearly I wasn't very interesting.
Yes. We're also trying to keep the broadcast a little bit shorter. Than usual. We try and, cut it down a little bit. Sometimes we get carried away because we just start talking about stuff and it just goes on. And so I'm trying to cut down the front part a little bit and make more time at the end so we can have more time to talk about the real, interesting stuff we're looking at. Which today, if you've seen the preview, is going to be about Daniel. So hopefully you're going to join us here and share with us some thoughts about Daniel. But before we get into that, we are going to talk about the very first section called Brett's Bodacious Soapbox.
Brett's Bodacious Soapbox.
So, if you watch the news or Facebook news or any kind of news at all, doesn't it seem like there's always some sort of ongoing scandal from one politician to the next? I think it was Mark Twain, I'm not positive it's him, but I think it was Mark Twain that said politics was a good name for what happens in government because poly meaning many and ticks meaning bloodsuckers. And it just seems that without fail, there's at least one politician who's always caught up in some sort of scandal and, going to be drummed out of the Senate or Congress or whatever. And multiple who are in a controversy for things they've said or done. And it's just this constant, ongoing, never-ending cycle of controversy and politicians being caught up in scandals and controversy, and many times making it a thing themselves, bringing it on themselves because they want to create this political theater. They want to grab attention, so they say outlandish things or do outlandish things or do things to draw attention to themselves and get, clicks and likes and shares, and it's just crazy. It creates this climate that we live in today of just, reality TV sit right in the middle of our, national capital with our congressmen and senators and all our politicians. Like, they're playing reality TV to try and, stay elected and stuff. And it's I think it's very unhealthy. And anyway, I wasn't thinking much about it until Miranda was talking about some stuff this week. It made me think about it. We're talking about Daniel. And, as you know, and we're going to talk again more about this in a little bit, but Daniel, he was a high-ranking politician through, a couple of kingdoms there. He didn't just transfer from, Democrats to Republicans. He was like, with America, and then America gets taken over by Russia, and he still put on, the top political ladder. And, as you get into it, you find it because of who he was, his integrity, his, honesty, who he was as a person, and, kings trusted him whether he was part of their kingdom or not. And that says a lot about who he was. And it just made me think in comparison and contrast to what we have today. How many politicians could you look at in the capital today and go, well, there's a Daniel. There's someone who is like Daniel, who has the integrity and the honesty. I think integrity and honesty is probably quiet. I'm sure there are people there that have integrity and honesty. I just think they tend to be the ones who aren't making a lot of noise or any noise at all. They're trying to do their best And the reason I bring this up is because we create that climate. We create or give the permission for that kind of thing, that kind of climate to take place. And I've said this before, so I'm saying it again. To demand integrity, honesty, truth, to demand what we expect of others from ourselves. Change happens and it starts with us. And, really check ourselves. How much do we feed into the online frenzy of, scandal and outrage and cancel culture and all this? Really look at our participation in it, either actively or passively, and be honest about it, and then come back to what Miranda tends to love to talk about, which I think is a great topic. Love your neighbor. Love others. And it's what we do, online and offline, really fulfilling that commandment to, love God as ourselves and love our neighbor as ourselves. I think that would have a radical change in the climate that we allow or give permission to take place around us and in the world. And let's strive to be like Daniel, the integrity and the honesty and the uprightness of Daniel, where no matter who we're working for or where we're at, people know us as a person who does their best to do their best. So that's Brett's soapbox for today. If you have any comments or opposite thoughts or ideas or opinions, leave them in the comments. We'd like to hear them. All right, today is a bit of the Brett Show. I'm not sure how it worked out this week, but most of the videos are me, so I apologize in advance for seeing a lot of me this morning. But we're going to get to Miranda, which I know is everyone's favorite part, but we'll get there. We just have to get through a couple videos. So our first video is going to be a pinch of salt, and it's learning sign language or Bible promises in sign language. And this week is Matthew 11:28. So here we are with a pinch of salt. Hi, Brett here with a pinch of salt, learning Bible promises in sign language. Bruce Larson was a pastor in New York City, and he tells of the story of a time where he was counseling a high-powered New York executive who was having a difficult time with those first initial steps of coming to Jesus, namely surrender. After a bit, he asked him to take a walk with him, And so he took him down to Rockefeller Plaza. And there at the entrance to that building is a huge statue of Atlas. The man standing and straining, holding the world on his shoulders, right? And they looked at it a few minutes, and then he invited him to cross the street, and they went into St. Patrick's Cathedral. And there, behind the high altar, there was a small statue of the boy Jesus. And in his hand, he also held the world. But instead of standing and straining like Atlas was, the boy Jesus was at peace. And it was in that moment that the New York executive understood he had a choice: to continue in life holding the weight of the world on his shoulders like Atlas, or to surrender his world to Jesus and find the peace that passes understanding that Jesus promised. And that brings us to today's text in sign language, which is Matthew 11:28. And it says, "Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." A promise from Jesus saying, come to me, and I'm going to give you this peace that passes understanding. So here's what it looks like. Come to, I'm going to go God instead of me. Just understand that me means God there. All who are tired and burdened. That's heavy laden, burdened, right? And God will give you rest. And that's Matthew 11:28, a great promise to live by every day. Hey everyone, so yeah, that was fun. If you like learning sign language and you like learning Bible promises and you want to put the two together, our little pinch of salt videos are fun. We're going to keep making some of those. And if you want to, there are, I think, 5 or 6 already we've made, and they are all on our website. And we'll post a link to the website in the comments, because on there we have all the pinch of salt videos, we have the mustard seed story videos, and a lot of other stuff that you can dive into and enjoy. So make sure if you want to find that link in the comments, we'll put it in. You can go to our website and catch up on all the past videos. Speaking of more videos, we're going to go to another mustard seed story. This one is from my past, way in the past, from the 80s. So if you're my age or older and you remember the 80s, sit down and brace yourself. We're going to take a little bit of a stroll back down the 80s memories lane for fun, where music made sense and hair and clothes didn't. There we go, Mustard Seed Stories. Hey, Brett here, telling a mustard seed story while I'm driving, which is kind of appropriate because this story happened while I was driving. Although it happened in the 80s. Yes, I wasn't always the strapping young, walking upright specimen of manhood I am today. No, like many of us, I made some poor decisions in the 80s. Poor decisions on hairstyle choices, wardrobe choices, and but never music choices. 80s music rules. Anyway, back in the 80s, I was a college student at Southern, and I was working in the summertime at a place called Putt Putt Golf and Games. I used to play professional putt-putt. Yes, there is such a thing. It's professional miniature golf. And no, it's not the miniature golf with dinosaurs and windmills. That's not real miniature golf. That's like family fun miniature golf. This was like for professionals. That's another story. Anyway, working at the Putt Putt there in Columbia, South Carolina, we used to have parties at night. After we would close around midnight, we'd lock the place up and we would have, all the free games because we had a big game room, and, we'd pour out the tokens and play games and have food. And yes, there was alcohol that flowed. And I didn't particularly drink a whole lot at the time, but it was one of the choices I was going to make that night that really secured my my conviction not to drink. See, that night somebody poured me a drink and brought it to me and said, hey, join the party, and part of me, this voice in my head said, don't do this. This could change your life. And I'm like, it's one drink, one drink's not going to change my life. And anyway, I kind of struggled because I could tell it was that still small voice. I had learned to listen to, or at least acknowledge that I think this is the Holy Spirit trying to tell me something. So I didn't drink it in the moment, but I did put it in one of the putt-putt water bottles, and I put the lid on it and thought, okay, I'll drink it later, because just about that time, one of the employees came up and asked if I would give them a ride home because they had been drinking. And I said, sure, I'll give you a ride home. So we jumped in the car and off we went to get her home safe. Along the way, back in the 80s, there used to be this really stupid dare kind of game, I guess, that college students would do, where they would lay down in the middle of the road and wait for a car to come by. And the idea is the car would see you and it would swerve and miss you, and it was fun. And that's exactly what happened. We were in her neighborhood. I was coming around a corner up a hill, so I was actually, accelerating. And there, out of nowhere, was this body lying in the middle of the road. And it was like barely enough time for me to swerve and miss them. I mean, you could barely put a piece of paper between me and the top of their head. That's how close it was. And I got by them, I slammed on brakes, I turned around and looked, and sure enough, they got up laughing, and running into the house. And I was, pretty upset. I was going to get out and go yell at the person, but the girl's like, no, just let's go home and, forget it. So we did. I dropped her off, and on the way home, that still small voice started talking to me again, and it said, you see, what might have happened had you had that drink, even a little bit? Your reflexes might have been slow enough that you would have hit that person, maybe even killed them, and your life would have been changed forever. And that really hit me. And in the moment, I was actually feeling this sense of gratitude, and I was thankful and saying, thank you, God, for talking to me. Even though I'm a hard-headed, sometimes don't listen, thank you for talking to me. And I really believe it was in that moment that the Holy Spirit was guiding me and leading me and convicting me, don't do this, because it could derail your life in ways that I don't want you to be going down that path. I have a different plan for you. And so I was very grateful. So it's just one of those faith-building stories from our lives, ways that we believe God has, stepped in and worked in our lives, worked in our hearts, talked to us, to guide us along onto the path and the journey He has for us. So, share with us your stories. Love to hear stories from everybody about how God has worked in your life. And we'll see you next time. So that was one story from my past of where a single decision, single choice could have sent your life one way or the other. I think we've all had moments like that, multiple moments like that in our lives where a decision or a choice, I could go left, right, up, down, or something, do something or not do something, and it can have dramatic changes in the trajectory of our lives, Sometimes not huge dramatic, sometimes less dramatic, but all choices have influence on the course of our life and the path we walk, and it's interesting to look back, the older you get, to look back and go, in moments, why did this choice lead to this? Why did I choose this? Why did I choose that? And to look back and see how God has tried to guide us in the things that we choose to do, not do, say, not say, all kinds of choices that we make every day that can have dramatic impact on who we are, who we're becoming, and again, the path of life that we are walking down. And that was just one, and that one could have been a dramatic change because, had I actually drank alcohol and hit somebody, then I would have been, with the police, and I would have been driving while, probably not intoxicated, but driving, while alcohol in my blood system, and that could have dramatically changed your life. And how many times do you have in your life where you felt God nudged you in a direction one way or the other, and it ended up having big impact, big changes in your life? So, again, if you have a story, we'd love to hear it. Either tell us about it in the comments, or you can shoot us a little video and send it to us if you're tech savvy enough, and or email us or something. Just let us know. We'd love to hear stories from you too, as ways God talked to you, ways God has spoken to you and worked in your life and guided you into the path He wanted you to walk. All right, coming up to our next coughing fit. Coming up to our next video. This is a fun one, potential and kinetic energy. And Aspen's object lessons are always kind of fun to do, even though we tend to do them at the last minute. But this one's a lot of fun, and it's talking about the difference between potential kinetic energy, both in the physical world and in the spiritual world. So Aspen's object lesson.
QE crate called air cannon. So as you saw in the video, these targets were the first things that we built. And then we built these, which, instead of shooting projectiles, they shoot air. Now, in the instructions, there's several games you can play, like tic-tac-toe or how many points can you get. But today, we're going to use it to demonstrate potential and kinetic energy. So right now, we have this set up for potential energy. Our air cannon and targets aren't doing much of anything, but the air cannon has the potential to create wind energy. Now here's how we go from potential to kinetic energy. Here's our air cannon, which has a hole in the front and a rubber elastic in the back, which is our form of potential energy in this experiment. So we're going to pluck this back and then let it loose. Ooh. Ha-ha! Wouldn't it be cool if we could see the wind energy coming out of the cannon? Well, we're going to do it with smoke.
Go.
Now that we've seen potential and kinetic energy in action, let's talk about some enlightening energy information. Energy is defined as the ability to do work. For instance, when the cannon was just sitting there, it wasn't doing a whole lot of anything. like other things that just sit around and don't do anything. But as soon as it starts moving or creating motion, that's work. And that's energy. You may think that energy is created when you start a fire or something explodes. Did you know you could travel the whole universe at warp speed? Or all of time and space in a TARDIS? And you would never find not even an atom of new energy. That's because all the energy in the universe already exists. Energy can't be destroyed or created. It can just be stored or transferred. All energy falls into one of two categories: potential, stored, or kinetic, motion, or speed. Potential energy has a few categories: elastic, gravitational, chemical, heat, sound,
Clean your room.
electric. Did you know that the Bible talks about potential and kinetic energy as well? Sort of. James 2:26 says, "For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also." That reminds me of another verse. 1 John 3:18. "Let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth." So basically, God created us all with tons of potential energy. But it doesn't do anybody any good unless we transfer it to kinetic energy and get out there with our faith and love in action.
All right, so that was fun. A couple more things I'll add to it, but yeah, kinetic and potential and kinetic energy plus, faith and works.
Right, okay. So apparently all energy already exists as either potential energy or kinetic energy, and it can neither be destroyed nor more of it made.
Yeah.
And so we're going to compare energy to faith, and we can't create it, we can't destroy it, we can either only store it or transfer its energy. So basically, we can either use the faith that God gave us, or we can just let it sit there and do nothing.
Yeah, which I thought was I thought that was really interesting. I for some reason didn't know that all energy already exists. You can't make more of it, nor can you destroy it. It's either stored or transferred, one of the two, which I guess is sort of like life itself, when you die, Christians don't believe that's it, you're over. We believe, I guess, that your energy is stored and then transferred at the resurrection. I guess that's how you would look at it.
Looking at it, yeah.
So
Yeah, and just as a preview for what we're talking about today, of how this plays into what we're talking about, is we're talking about man's wisdom versus God's wisdom today, and how that worked in the story of Daniel and the lion's den. And so the wisdom of man generally lets the faith that God has given him lie there as potential energy, right? And while the wisdom of God takes that potential energy and lets God use it, much like that air cannon, because we can't see anything in it. And if you were to look at that air cannon, it's much like we look at faith. It's pretty flat looking and nothing in there, and you wonder how on earth that is actually going to do anything. And so that's why we tend to rely on our own wisdom, because it makes so much more sense, because we can see it. At least we think we can see it, and we make these plans, which we really can't make happen, as we'll see clearly in the story of Daniel as well. Men made plans, and yes, and then no. So, anyways, but like faith, we can't see that it has all kinds of energy. But like energy, which we can't make or destroy, that's like faith also. We can't grit up enough faith to make anything happen. We can't grit up enough faith to just make God basically do what we hope that we want him to do. But we can't destroy faith either, because faith is a part of who God is, a part of his energy that he gives to us. And faith is just living out a loving relationship with God. And which is exactly what Daniel did. And wow, what power was released in that lion's den. I mean, there was nothing that Daniel could do. All Daniel did was continue his relationship with God, his communication with God. He continued to do that in an honest manner and didn't try to hide that. But the power in that was phenomenal.
But way before the lion's den, there was obviously an established relationship with God that, who knows what Daniel's plan was as a teenager. Think back to when you were a teenager and what was your idea and plan for life, if it even extended very far into the future at all, because as teenagers, most of us don't think that far into the future. But imagine, what was Daniel's plans? And, when the country got taken over and he was carried off to Babylon, and all of those plans were gone, and then even then, as he's in Babylon as a slave and going through the initial process of he and his buddies being filtered out for they're going to go on to be elevated slaves in a sense, or just labor slaves, and all the plans and ideas, thoughts they may have had, and where did all those go? The only thing they kept really consistent with was their relationship with God and being true to him. And that's what carried them through all the stories you read, the golden statue and the lion's den and all that. And it was all started back when I think they were first carried off, and they decided to be determined in being true to God. Right.
And so when we think the name Daniel, we think of words like faith. And and so what about if you thought the name Jesus? What's the first thing that you think of?
Yeah.
Is it by chance money? Do you think, oh man, he had all that money in his bank account? We don't, do we? Because that's not what Jesus came to this earth for. And we have to put the disclaimer in there that money, there's nothing wrong with money in itself. It is an inanimate object that we ascribe power to, or not.
It's only valuable because we say it is.
Yeah. So in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with it. You can have plenty of it. It doesn't make you a bad person. That's not the point.
But I do like the question, what's the first thing you think of in Jesus? You think Jesus is, and Jesus associated with, and it's not money.
Yeah.
But think of that with other people, in the Bible, you think of John the Baptist. What's the first thing you think of John the Baptist? What's the first thing you think of with Mary Magdalene? What's the first thing you think of with Barabbas? What do you associate these people with? And, we all have different perspectives, but so do the disciples. Matthew was, a multi-generation, Jewish guy. And so in his book, showing that Jesus was from a long Jewish heritage was important. So that's kind of an emphasis in his book. Mark wrote for Peter, and Peter was the impetuous Peter, and so his book is full of action because he sees Jesus as the man of action. Luke, being a physician, focused on the miracles because Luke, being a doctor, that fascinated him. He would have been like, Luke would have associated Jesus, miracles. Peter would have gone, Jesus, action. Matthew would have gone, Jesus, Jewish. They would all had a word association. Money usually doesn't come up first. I guess unless it's Judas, then that would be,
That's true.
But
30 pieces of silver.
Yeah.
And 30 pieces of silver and betrayal. Yeah. So, and also, when we think of names like Rockefeller and Bill Gates and Elon Musk and whatnot.
Yeah. Elon Musk, money. Bill Gates, money. Brett Hadley.
They may not think no money, but
you should. Job. Never mind.
Yeah. So basically, and this does relate to the story of Daniel that we're talking about today. What happens when we make money our first priority? When we make money our first priority, oftentimes people now become a commodity. Their worth is now based on how much money they have and how that is going to benefit you.
Yeah.
And
goes to a quote I'm sure a lot of you have heard. It's actually, I looked it up today. It's from it's a Mormon gentleman. I forget his name off the top of my head. I looked it up. But he was the one that came up with the idea of love people, use things. Don't love things and use people. Yeah.
So basically, we treat people a lot of times as objects to gain something from, rather than treating them as the people who God created for us to love.
Yeah.
And so we think some people are certainly unloving, but that is not unlovable. That is not what God says at all.
No.
So
it's again, if we're loving people and using things, we're usually using things to love people. But if we're using people and loving things, we're usually using people to get things and get more things. And that's kind of the opposite. But of course, I've seen it where you can actually take it even in a religious sense and get overzealous, and you, under the guise of loving people, you're using people to get crowns in your, crowns, jewels in your crowns in heaven. But I remember a friend of mine telling me stories about a conference he worked for and how much pressure there was to baptize people, so much so that pastors would lose their jobs if they didn't keep up a quota, and they would actually get names from cemeteries and stuff to count on their list because there was so much pressure. You have to baptize so many people and get so many, and now you've just crossed over using religion into using people for something. You have to, that's where I think it's always a good idea to just really check yourself from every day and go, how am I loving people? What did I do today, or what can I do tomorrow? What am I doing to love people and not love things? Yeah.
Yeah, so we're talking about the story of Daniel today, and we've just taken a look past, based on what politics are like and such like that, and have integrated that into this story of what could possibly have happened. Right, and so you had the great takeover of Babylon by the Medes and the Persians.
Yeah.
And clearly,
you wonder how they figured that out. Medes and the Persians. How come it's not the Persians and the Medes? Did they get around a table and go, well, you go first and we'll go second? No, I want to go first. And why can't we be the Persians and the Medes? And Okay, that's not really in
I
our
don't
talk.
know, but maybe M came before P.
Oh, see, that's what it is.
Right, because clearly in their language it's
that's right.
Yeah.
I'm sure they used English just like they do in all space, TV and movies.
Yeah.
Everyone speaks English.
Yes.
I don't know. Moving on.
Yes. So, these were all countries around there. There were other countries. And since Daniel was a politician, he could very well have had political interactions with the king.
We know he did. He was an ambassador in many ways, that
so
he would go out.
He would have had interactions, and they would have known that this was an honest politician. They couldn't pay him off. Maybe they even tried. That seems to be the standard way of procedure for any number of politicians.
Especially in those days. Always get an inside guy to help you take over the kingdom. In fact, that's, how they ended up getting the plan, to go in through the Watergate stuff. I mean, they paid somebody off.
And look at Jesus as well.
Exactly.
With Judas and such.
And they could have come up with talking to their buddies, they said, we'll have you tried. I don't know, what's that guy, Daniel? I bet he could get you. No, don't even try Daniel.
Yeah.
We have.
Yeah, we have, and it's not going to work.
You'll never get him.
Yeah. So, I don't know about, any of you guys out there who are watching us, but when you have a good worker, a good, solid, honest worker, they are worth a ton of money. In fact, even a good, solid, average worker is worth a lot. But what's not so great is when you've got the workers who don't work. Yeah. So this is when King Darius then came in and took over Babylon, was the new king there. He wanted Daniel to work for him because he knew that he was a good worker and that he was going to support his kingdom despite anything because he was an honest person. Yeah,
and I can't prove this part. It just, if it was me, it would make sense. But by this point, Daniel had a lot of his visions, and he had the vision of the statue, and Daniel had a world perspective that probably most of those guys go in and they want their kingdom to last forever. That's their thing. Ours is going to be forever. I mean, you get that all the way into World War II. Germans going to take over the world and last forever. And Daniel knew better. And Daniel had been told by God, here's the history of the world. And so he had this perspective of, this, worldwide, all through time perspective that others didn't, knowing that this kingdom, that kingdom, isn't the important thing.
Right. It was his service to God that was the important thing. And so as long as he did that first, it really didn't matter if he was working for King Nebuchadnezzar or his son Belshazzar that came after him or King Darius that came after him.
Right.
He would serve his God and be a witness to these world powers.
Which is the same perspective we're supposed to have as Christians, especially Adventists. The worldwide perspective, the full-time perspective, not just what we're in the moment, but we believe the great controversy. That's a bigger life perspective, and we believe in the second kingdom. That's the life perspective, just like Daniel.
Right, and so King Darius came in and he chose 120 satraps, which basically were governors in a sense, or assistant governors, however you want to look at it. And then he chose 3 guys to be over these 120. So you'd call them head governors maybe in a way.
Right.
And Daniel was one of those. And so if you divide them up, he's in charge of, let's say, 40, give or take, I suppose, assistant governors underneath him. And so, when you get to thinking about it, they're used to, in politics, lying or cheating or bribing people, taking bribes to get what they want. And it's all to their personal financial gain. So here they have a guy, their boss, who the king likes.
What probably really irritates them, because they were probably from Darius's political party,
absolutely,
and here's the outsider, and he likes him better than us.
And so it would stand to reason that quite possibly Daniel may have had a meeting with his guys, right? I mean, you're probably going to have meetings with your guys, and he may have very well have said, well, I I don't want any bribes going on. I don't want any cheating going on, any lying going on. And so this is how we protect our king's government. And can you imagine now their extra source of income and such has just gone by the wayside. And I can imagine that could very well have been part of the reason why they wanted to get rid of Daniel.
Because it would have gone against their normal way of life. I mean, of course you step on people to get up the ladder. Of course you take... I mean, of course, this is how it works.
It makes sense. That's how they were used to doing it. And it worked. In a sense, it worked.
And it would be like... Today, it'd be like the leader of either party going, I don't want to hear anybody say anything negative about the other party. And if they have an idea, I want us to talk about the merits of it. And people would just be like, yeah, okay, you're an idiot.
Yeah, let's get a new president.
Yeah, let's get a new president. You're out of here.
Yeah. So it says there in Daniel 6, where this story is found, it says, in fact, the king appreciated Daniel so much that he was thinking about setting him over the whole realm. Now, I can imagine that probably set off all 120 of the satraps, because you've got at least 40 who are probably already a little displeased with how he's running their section of the government, and they've probably grumbled to the other satraps, oh, we wished you worked for your guy instead. And then now they're like, no, the king is thinking about setting him over all of us. Oh, no, thanks. We have got to get rid of this plan because it's not going to work out well for us at all. Yeah. So they tried to find some law that he had broken. And, maybe however that may have worked, maybe some books he had fixed, or how maybe he had cheated the king, but they couldn't find any law that he had broken. So these weren't dumb guys. They took a look at it and they said, you know what? This guy serves his God, and everything is second to that. Serving his God is first. And so how can we make a law that if he serves his God, he will be breaking that law? And so that's how they came up with going to the king and saying, oh, great king that you are, God that you are, how about we just have 30 days that nobody can ask a favor from any god except you?
You really got to wonder if these guys believed that. Like the pharaohs were supposed to be gods and this guy's supposed to be... I mean, come on. I mean, the people know themselves. They know they were born. They know the things they've thought and done and stuff. And, you wonder if, you're a god. Did they really believe that? Or was it just like, okay, I'm gonna let you believe that because it gives me, fame, glory, and power. But how many guys really believe they were a god, So go ahead and walk on water. If you're a god, you can do that, But...
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we don't really know because we weren't there, I guess.
And that should be the king's very first red flag when God comes in and starts playing to your vanity. What follows can't be good.
True, but I mean, we all like our vanity being fed.
Yeah.
And
if he was a wise king, he would have been, these guys are blowing smoke. Whatever's coming next is no good.
That's true. He had to be politically savvy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But
he loved that vanity.
Yeah, I mean,
pride does that.
Who doesn't? So, anyways, after that law came into being, apparently the king didn't feel as though he needed the input of his other government officials. Yeah. He took the word of the satraps up. Great idea. So so how did Daniel get word of that? I mean, how does it work today? He probably had an office, and one of his 40 satraps underneath him very likely could have been delivering messages anyways. A report from this, a report from something else over there. And in the process,
the camel count's down and crops are bad because we don't have camel dung anymore.
Right.
So, and by the way.
The king signed in a new law for the next 30 days. You won't be able to ask for anything from any other god but him for the next 30 days. And do you know what the punishment is? They'll throw you right into the lion's den. Oh, how horrible that would be. I can just, hear the bones being crushed as the person gets thrown down there.
Or it could have been just more like, And here's ridiculous. For the next 3 days, you can only pray to, like, and then you're going to be in the lion's den. Like, what idiot would do that? It's like 3 days.
Yeah, 30 days.
30 days.
30 days of
30
praying
days, yeah.
To no other god but King Darius, or making requests from any other god. And so, I can't imagine that I mean, here's Daniel. I mean, he'd been through a lot of political stuff already. He no doubt saw right through that. And so he had a choice.
I mean, he was probably expecting it. There's no way this was going on. It came out of nowhere. He's probably like, well, one day these guys are going to come up with something. And then when he heard, he's like, and here it is.
And so that's what, And but as the saying goes, the plans of mice and men often go astray. So now a mouse sees that tidbit of cheese there in the trap. And basically, his desire for the cheese binds him to the reality of the trap. Or basically, being a mouse, he doesn't recognize the danger of the trap. Also, the trap was set by one much wiser than the little mouse, and set by one who desires the death of the mouse. But all the mouse can see is a tidbit of cheese that he perceives will sustain his life and be tasting in the process, when in reality the pursuit of the cheese will be his death sentence. And this is what happened to all those satraps that were pursuing the cheese, which was getting rid of Daniel. They couldn't see anything beyond that. They couldn't see the danger of that at all. And so basically, the cheese was so tempting that they could not see the potential for utter ruin. So in essence, they had turned Daniel into a commodity, and they felt their lives would be worth more with Daniel gone. Yeah. And so they set a trap to dispose of him, but they only knew the wisdom of man and not the wisdom of God.
Yep, and so, setting their own trap and getting caught in their own trap.
Right. And so now that they have set the trap, what will Daniel do? Well, clearly we already know how the story ends. But Daniel didn't know how the story ends. His only knowing to the end of the story was that God had always promised to take care of him, and that God had always taken care of him. But in the end, it's not about our lives here on this earth. It's about life in eternity.
Which again goes back to his perspective. They would have been
right.
What happens to me, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Like, well, if God saves us, great. If not, He doesn't have to.
Yeah, but we will still continue to serve our God regardless of what you are going to do with us. And so Daniel had a choice. Was he going to quit praying altogether? Will he pray in the closet where no one can see him? Or will he continue to pray there in the window like he always has 3 times a day? So I don't believe that when he decided to pray in the window 3 times a day like I always did, that he was flaunting his rebelliousness, his potentially being above the law or anything like that. Like we as humans occasionally do. We'll pick some small thing or even a large thing and flaunt that rebelliousness.
Yeah.
And he was simply living out the wisdom of God, which is greater than the wisdom of man, even though it cannot be seen in that very moment.
Yeah, he was doing what he always did. He didn't change his pattern. And in some sense, the praying at the window was a witness and testimony to the people, of who he was and who God is and his relationship with God. And he didn't start it, when the law came in. He was just not going to stop because of this law.
Yeah. And so the wisdom of man says, save yourself, save yourself. And yet the wisdom of God says, I will save you. And see, the wisdom of God clothes itself in the truth of God. And it has no need to flaunt anything because truth is there in all its richness and its glory, but it looks plain. It looks very plain and unattractive to man. But it
Which
doesn't...
is kind of what I said earlier when I thought truth and integrity, I know they exist in government, but I think they're just very plain and quiet.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And anyways, God's truth has no need to flaunt itself and its riches because God's wisdom lives out ultimate humility. And ultimate humility serves out the wisdom and lives out the wisdom of God.
And sometimes, and I've heard preachers talk about it and stuff, well, we would be like Daniel, though. We would be like, well, I'm still going to do it. I'm just going to do it, in the closet for a little bit and, get by this thing and, I don't know. I kind of struggle with that a little bit, but, just, I'm still going to pray. I'm just going to do it in here now. But what we don't, what would that have said to the people had Daniel done that?
Yeah. But so basically, the wisdom of man lives out the opposite of God's truth. The wisdom of God lives out God's truth. The wisdom of man lives out then the opposite of God's truth.
But sometimes wisdom of man is living out fear or reaction to fear. Fear of, like, what's going to happen if.
Right, absolutely. It serves fear. The wisdom of man serves fear. Fear of losing, who they are, basically, who they've built themselves up to be. And so if the wisdom of God dresses in truth and has no need to flaunt its riches because God's wisdom lives out ultimate humility, then man's wisdom lives out pride, and pride flaunts its riches because pride says you must have and you must do in order to be. And so that's what pride just leads men on, with fear of losing who they are. So he didn't choose to go pray in secret, to break the new law in secret, because when we lie, and that would have been a lie, it would have been intentionally deceiving others if he would have done that. And it would have led to the potential, really, for people to just come out and say to each other first, of course, oh, I'll bet he's just praying where we can't see him. Isn't that how people talk? He's just praying because he's afraid of the lion's den, because they're afraid of the lion's den, so why wouldn't he be afraid of the lion's den? And so then that, of course, leads to the person who's, well, I'm just going to ask him. And then now he's really caught with, does he tell an out-and-out lie, or does he just go and tell the truth and then still face the lion's den?
And don't forget, this law was, no ordinary lie. It wasn't just hiding that he prayed. It was acknowledging that Darius would have been a greater God, because it's like, you're not going to pray to any other God but me, Darius, And so this was not just, I'm not going to, I'm going to hide my praying. It is, I got to keep doing this because, no, Darius, one, isn't a God, and two, he's certainly not higher than, my God. And so it was just like Elijah and the false prophets, who is the greater God? And, it's really kind of the same thing. This law was saying, Darius was saying, I'm God, and I'm the one that will be first. And Daniel's like, not so much.
Right. Well, which is what we all do in a sense. We like to think that I will be first, but that's not how we live by faith. So Daniel basically simply looked beyond this life and into the next, which we had mentioned before. And he simply gave up saving himself by deceit and for his pride. He gave that up. Because if the wisdom of God is clothed in truth, then the wisdom of man is clothed, of course, in lies and deceit. And anyway, so praying in the closet would have just plain deceitful. And the wisdom of man seeks to save two things, and that's its pride and its earthly life. And he chose to just go beyond that and live out something much bigger, because the wisdom of God seeks to save only one thing, and that is our soul, the very salvation of our soul.
Our energy, which cannot be destroyed, only transferred.
Yes.
Just had a commercial there.
Yes. Okay. So going back to the where we kind of started this morning with the wisdom of man generally lets the faith that God has given him lie there. We do, because it looks like it can't do anything for us, and it looks like all the plans that we make can do something for us and get us somewhere. So we let the faith lie there as potential energy. So while the wisdom of God takes that potential energy and lets God use it like that air cannon. We look inside it. There's nothing in there to hit anything. And yet, like real faith, God That power in God's faith takes down walls that we think can't be taken down. And poof, it's nothing to God. It's just a little bit of paper and not even that.
Yep. Yep. I did think that's a good, from the project, that's a good analogy. Poof.
Yep. And so, anyways, we can't on our own grit up enough faith to make anything happen. It's just a hope. It's like those satraps who put together a plan and they hoped to get rid of Daniel. Well, they didn't realize that they couldn't see. They couldn't even begin to imagine a God with more wisdom than what they were coming up with at the moment. They couldn't see why that plan wouldn't work. It was going to be perfect. It was going to take down Daniel, and he was going to take himself down. Daniel was just going to take himself down. They had nothing to do with it. He chose that for himself. But in reality, while they were planning his death, they were actually trapping themselves in their own, and they couldn't see that. And so, yeah, back to the treating people as objects of gain rather than loving them. Do we look down on others to make ourselves better than they are? It comes down to that simplicity of it. We are gaining by putting others down. We're gaining, So, or do we simply love that person despite all by the power of God?
And I think we said this last week, in the whole evaluation of things, relationships are more important than being right. Be it your family, your friends, your church family, whatever. When there's controversy, when there's something coming up, or always kind of check yourself and go, what's more important here, relationship, or me either being right or believing or continuing to think I'm right. And whenever we choose relationship over being right, it's always better. Because, we might even be able to prove, see, I was right and I was justified. And if the relationship is sacrificed in the process, then everyone's lost.
Yeah, because that's not, we all say we want peace, for example, and yet that's not choosing the peaceful way of living.
Yeah. And so there you have it.
Yes.
Daniel and potential and kinetic energy.
Played out right there in the Bible.
In the Bible.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, thanks for joining us and, being patient through my coughing fits. But this was a fun topic for us. We really enjoyed this one. We enjoyed all of them, but this was particularly fun.
I love them all.
Yeah, this was a good one. Do we have next week?
Potentially. Well, I thought I had next week's until I was reading through an old journal, like my last journal, this morning, and now it's going to be a toss-up. But what I thought potentially we might talk about next week is we need to be more concerned with our input than with our output. Yeah. Because when we let God fill us up with His love, then by natural consequence, that is what is going to come out.
Yeah. And that's actually focusing more on the balance of faith and works. Is like if we're really focusing on what we're putting in, what is going to come out is going to be a result of that, what we put in.
Right. And on the other hand, though, if we start focusing more on our output, let's say being good.
Yeah.
We want to be good, so therefore we're focusing on being good, which is our output. Mm-hmm. Now, that can just lead down a real not so great path, because yes, while we may change some of our behaviors and stuff, now this causes us to also look at the output of others, and then we begin to compare, and then
leaves us empty.
Yeah,
because we're all output.
Like that. Yeah. So we need that focusing on God filling us up, and we do that just by spending time with Him.
Oh, it could be a good topic, so we might do that.
Potentially. Or potentially, as a thought that I had written down to potentially explore further, was comparing, making an analogy of Psalm 23 with humility. Struck my mind as I was reading it once, and so one or the other.
One or the other.
Yeah.
So join us next week and find out.
Yeah, we'll find out soon too.
All right, so again, thanks for joining us. If you have any ideas, thoughts, comments, or just want to say hi, please leave it in the comments. We'd love to hear from people. And we hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next week.